Bora lá. Dia 9, eu acho, né? Quinta vez que eu vou fazer isso aqui. Agora do braço, mais flexão. Da outra vez eu fiz 4 vezes de 6. Na última vez eu fiz 8. Hoje eu faço de 6 ainda ou tento aumentar para 8. Fazer de 6 e ver se está leve, né? Depois que ficar assim de boa, fazer o de 6 que eu vou aumentar. Tem que ser com calma, não pode ir um dia e um minuto já aumentar todo dia não. Progressivo overload. Quando estabilizar isso aqui eu aumento. Depois quando estabilizar outro eu aumento, né? Um dia outro, dia outro. Então bora ver os 6 aqui, como é que vai ser e se vai de boa. Porra, contei errado e fiz 8. Então vai ser 4 vezes de 8 mesmo. Foi leve de boa até, nem senti. Evolução. Eu vou morrer nas seguintes. Agora, isso foi 10 segundos, eu tenho que esperar 3 minutos. On the day of the vote, tensions continue to run high. An electoral monitoring agency reported 250 incidents at polling stations across the country, while hoax bomb threats were reported not only at stations in Moldova, but also in other European capitals, such as Brussels and Rome. However, at the end of the day, PAS ultimately emerged victorious. With 99.7% of the vote counted, PAS gained 50.14% of the vote, and due to secure 55 parliamentary seats, giving the party a comfortable majority. The pro-Russian patriotic bloc came in second, winning 24.2% of the vote and gaining 26 seats. A clear setback for pro-Russian forces who have already called for protests starting Monday, accusing the PAS of stealing the election. Then the remaining seats were split among other smaller parties, many of whom have ties to the pro-Russian parties. With the new centre-left alternative bloc winning 8 seats, the populist OUR party securing 6, and Democracy also gaining 6. As I mentioned, for their part, the pro-Russian bloc has promised protests in the claim that the election was rigged against them. As well as those parties we mentioned earlier, just 2 days before the election, the pro-Russian Heart of Moldova party, formerly part of the patriotic bloc, a pessoa se levanta aqui, né? Eu só vou se levantar do lado também, é muito distante. Eu quero que as pessoas se levantem assim do lado também. Nunca fiz, pega um do lado e pega do outro. Eu queria também os que pegam assim do lado, assim embaixo, né? Also accused the government of numerous and blatant attempts to limit the vote of Transnistrian people by moving polling stations outside of Transnistria. Nonetheless, the margin of PAS's victory is a pretty decisive win for Moldova's pro-EU ambitions, injecting fresh momentum into a path that had recently begun to look shaky. However, the road to EU membership is still a long way away. Vai ter desse aqui assim, né? While Sandu hopes the country will be able to get membership by 2030, Moldova has yet to open up any chapter negotiations. Tem coisa de ajustamento não, né? Mãe disse que queria aprender a fazer isso, que ela não consegue. Quando eu era pequeno, ela fica fazendo isso. A altura. Pra mãe tem que ser dessa altura aqui assim, pra mim tem que ser mais alto, né não? Como é? Mas se for dessa altura aqui assim, tem que ser maiorzão assim pra pegar e coisa me levantar, né? Opa, é forte, filho. Já foi, 3 minutos. Porra, fechei a desgraça do YouTube. Tá no comercial e era pra trocar só. Próximo TLDR.
Since regaining power in 2021, the Taliban have been incredibly diplomatically isolated. Until recently, the so-called Islamic Emirates wasn't officially recognized as the legitimate government of Afghanistan by any other country, and they'd even fallen out with countries that had once been relatively friendly with them, including Pakistan.
Agora eu senti o oitavo, hein?
Including Russia, India, China,
Mas dá pra fazer os oito, talvez. Se a próxima não tiver muito morto, nós já foi uma dificuldade aqui agora.
On matters like trade, energy and migration. And in July, Russia became the first country
Pra fazer mais lento, pra fazer mais rápido, mais lento é mais difícil, né?
with others like Uzbekistan also signaling their intent to follow suit.
Depois posso avançar
So,
com
in this video, we'll
exclusivo.
explain why
Quando
more
tiver
and more
fácil.
countries are re-engaging
Não pode ir
with the
tipo
Taliban,
8, 12,
and whether
20,
this trend
50.
will continue.
O crescimento, falo de 8 a 12, né? Vou chegar em 12, eu vou fazer 4 de 12. O que é uma vergonha isso, né? Eu tenho que fazer 30, já estava
Dive
morto.
deeper into politics,
Quando mais de
our
30.
magazine Too Long. Yes,
12 tem que aumentar a dificuldade desses 12. Fazer 6 explosivas aí agora, ou o que seja.
And if we're observing the end of the American order. Find out more by clicking the link in the description. Let's start with some context. The Taliban first took power in Afghanistan around 1996, in the aftermath of the Afghan Civil War, whereupon they imposed a harsh interpretation of Islamic Sharia law. They systematically massacred Afghan civilians, blocked UN food supplies from 160,000 starving Afghans, burned land and destroyed homes, banned media and music, banned women from education and work, and cracked down on religious and ethnic minorities. As such, the Taliban quickly became an international pariah, and at the same time, only 3 states, the UAE, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, which all provided aid, recognised the regime. In October 2001, the US led the invasion of Afghanistan to topple the Taliban, which had sheltered Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda after 9/11. But the Taliban regrouped across the border in Pakistan and began taking back territory less than 10 years later. And when the US withdrew its troops in August 2021, the Taliban immediately ousted the US-backed Afghan government and retook power. Many countries immediately cut ties with Afghanistan and withdrew international aid, which had been equivalent to 40% of Afghanistan and financed more than 75%
O
of
cara ajusta e bota onde quiser, velho. Como assim? Bota nas portas.
The UN estimates
O
that
bagulho cresce, é a vara do Goku.
almost 2/3 of the population now require humanitarian assistance, and cuts to foreign aid, most notably by the US,
Tá,
previously the
fuck.
single largest
3 minutos já? Caralho, tá rápido, hein?
children who are facing malnutrition.
Tá, não descansou ainda
The
não.
Taliban quickly became the most diplomatically isolated government in the world. No other country recognized their claim to Afghanistan, and perhaps their closest ally, Pakistan, which had maintained relations with the Taliban throughout the US occupation, quickly fell out with them over their support for the Pakistani Taliban, which Pakistan considers a terrorist group. However, in the past year or so, other countries in the region have slowly begun engaging with the Taliban, and by July 2024, over a dozen, including China, Iran, Japan, Qatar, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Uzbekistan, India, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan,
E o último agora vai ser bruto, hein?
Several others, including Iran and Turkey, also had a consular presence in Afghanistan.
8 e
Then, in
40.
2025,
Tem que ir
Russia
até
became the
11 e
first country
40.
to officially
12.
recognize the Taliban regime as the legitimate government in Afghanistan, with other Central Asian states and Iran reportedly likely to follow, although they might be waiting for China to make the move first. So, why is the Taliban's international isolation now ending? Well, the first reason is just pragmatism. The isolation imposed on the Taliban was mostly about signalling disapproval of their Islamist policies, but there was also some hope it might pressure the Taliban into moderating their politics, or even undermine their grip on Afghanistan. This hasn't happened. The Taliban are clearly committed to their interpretation of Islam, and their hold on Afghanistan looks pretty secure. And there's now a sense that this imposed isolation is mainly harming ordinary Afghans. As such, many countries have chosen to accept that the Taliban aren't going anywhere, and for that reason, they may as well do business with them. This brings us on to the second reason: trade. The Afghan provinces of Ghazni, Nuristan, and Helmand are home rule reserves.
Essa porra ajustável é tudo mais vendida. A primeira
which are a major source of foreign interest.
Segunda, essa terceira vem aquela que eu tava pensando em pegar.
That they secured more than
viu o
$7
quê?
billion of investments from mining companies from
A
China,
quarta é,
Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and
a
the
sexta
UK,
é, a
which include
sétima é,
multi-billion-dollar
a
Chinese
nona
contracts for
e a
projects
11.
such as the Nest
Isso aqui
Line
também é,
and
essa aqui é mais diferente, tem um grip maior.
Given the global race to control critical
Carai.
mineral supply chains, which China is currently leading,
Pode botar
China
saco
is
aqui
keen
também.
to build relations with the Taliban, and
É
in
hiato, é?
2024 formally accepted an ambassador from the Taliban, despite its concerns about
Será que presta, hein, essa porra?
Afghanistan.
Tem uns vídeos aqui
The
do povo
Taliban
unboxing
also
testando,
working
vou
with
ver.
regional partners on various speculative trade and energy corridors Afghan railway, a proposed trade rail corridor from Uzbekistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan. Similarly, Russia, which has been seeking new energy deals to help fund its war economy, has invited the Taliban to economic forums in Moscow, removed the Taliban from its list of banned terrorist
Caralho, eu tô
organizations in March,
sentindo cansaço
and
aqui,
in
ó. Acho
July
que
became the first country to
esse
formally
último 8 aqui
recognize the
já vai
Taliban
ser
government. Russia
até
is
a
also
falha.
exploring ways
Precisa
to
também.
establish its presence in Afghanistan's oil and gas sector, with a focus on the country's northern provinces, which were historically linked to the Soviet Union. The third reason for the Taliban coming out of isolation is the global migration crisis. This is particularly relevant to the EU, where immigration and asylum have become more politically salient issues. Until 2024, Afghanistan had been the second most represented country of origin among asylum applicants for 6 consecutive years, before falling to third behind Venezuela and Syria. Afghanistan also accounts for the second biggest group, after Syria, of third-country nationals in the EU community. This is why, in recent months, Germany and Austria have held talks with Taliban representatives about deportations. In July, Germany accredited 2 Taliban officials to work on migration and organised a deportation flight to send convicted criminals
Caralho, tô
back to
cansado.
Afghanistan.
Dá pra sentir a
And this
morte.
month, a Taliban delegation
Caralho.
for talks
Vai
with
ser da
identifying
pulso.
Afghan nationals for potential deportation. But it's not just Europe. Pakistan and Iran, which host large numbers of Afghan refugees, have also been negotiating with the Taliban to repatriate, i.e. deport, nationals. There's obviously a risk these schemes violate the principles of non-refoulement, a principle of international human rights law that prevents countries from sending people back to a country where their freedom or safety is at risk.
Porra.
But these countries are probably
Vai fazer 6, 18 cada um.
Taliban will
Tá bom.
foster their
No último eu fui até não
country
consegui mais.
for return.
Isso que é falha? Tô tendo e não vai.
Well, this trend will probably continue, given that each time a country engages, the less taboo engaging with the Taliban becomes, as evidenced by the domino effect we've seen since Russia's
Isso aí. 4 vezes
The
8.
media landscape right now is moving so
Não sei se
fast
estou melhorando,
that
não sei se é porque o
it's
pessoal precisou
easy to
descansado
hide
hoje.
what you already
Acabei de
know.
beber 1 litro de cappuccino ali agora. Me deu força. Mas foi isso aí. Nono dia. Amanhã é perna.
Luckily, our sponsor this week, Ground News, are experts at media bias.